So this is going to be a little shorter presentation. So yeah. So really what we see in the development of Pakistan is that central to the idea of, for Quaid-e-Azam, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who himself was a Khoja, and Allama Iqbal, was this idea of the two-nation theory, that somehow that Muslims they consist of a separate and distinct nation within the subcontinent, and that in order to safeguard their rights and their freedoms, you would need to create a separate nation state. And that's, of course, the idea of Pakistan, right? Now, there are issues with this in terms of how it's categorized, because clearly religion was not sufficient to keep the nation together, because eventually the eastern part of the country then breaks off in a quite a violent war, and Bangladesh is created, right? So anyway, so this is kind of the core idea, though, that Islam is kind of what unifies Pakistan. But again, the idea of how do we define Islam? What does Islam actually mean? We have huge distinctions and differences between the Shias and the Sunnis. There's another group that's treated very badly in Pakistan known as the Ahmadis. So there are different groups, right? In terms of even the idea of Islam is not a unified idea. But that being Pakistani at some point also means being tied to the land itself. Especially for groups like the Sindhis, they believe that they are sons of the soil, and that the ancient heritage of Pakistan is also part of who they are, right? So they're tied to the land. I mean, of course, Urdu is only spoken natively by only about 5% of the population. So the vast majority of people within Pakistan speak different regional languages, and then Urdu is a language of education. It's a higher order language. And of course, the highest order language is English, which allows you access into certain types of elite spaces and power within Pakistan. And then the Pakistani state and the military sees itself as a defender of Muslims worldwide. And we see this particularly with how the Pakistani state and the army engage with the issue of Kashmir. So the question then becomes, what does it mean to be Pakistani, right? And I think that this is a big challenge, because what ends up happening is that you create a very weird narrative of what it means to be Pakistani. So you focus on Indus Valley civilization, and one of the reasons why Indian Hindus and Pakistani Muslims like Indus Valley, the ancient civilization, the first civilization that we know of in South Asia that goes back thousands of years, is because we know very little about it, or we project what we want onto it. The language is, as of yet, completely undeciphered. So we don't know who these people were. We don't know what their ideas were. We just have some seals and different types of objects from that world. But it goes into, not deep antiquity, it goes into pre-recorded history. And so that provides an authenticity of age that allows South Asian civilization to be seen as equal to Egyptian civilization, to Chinese civilization, to Near Eastern civilization. So that's why Pakistanis and Indians both love the Indus Valley civilization. And then when you read a Pakistani history book, there's a huge gap. So you go thousands of years and only like 2 or 3 pages on thousands of years of Buddhist history, Hindu history, Jain history. All of that is kind of bypassed. And then really Pakistani history starts with Muhammad ibn Qasim coming into Sindh in 711. And then, of course, a lot is dedicated to Delhi Sultanate, to Mughals, to medieval Muslim rule, British colonization, of course, the fight for independence, Quaid-e-Azam and Allama Iqbal, and then sort of this idea of Indian aggression and Pakistani resistance, right? So these are sort of the major narratives that exist within a Pakistani studies textbook. So I think, I think this is the question, I think, then, for Pakistanis going forward now, right? So I think one of the things that we see is that Pakistani society has gone through stages of its own development, secularism, it's gone through Islamism, it's coming out of violence and Islamist politics, and is now entering, I hope, a new phase of a more pluralistic or maturation of Pakistani identity. So the question then becomes like, what is the place of non-Muslims in contemporary Pakistan, right? So it's like 98% Muslim. What do we deal, how do we integrate the Hindus that are left in Sindh and Christian, a lower caste that are there? Jains, who for the most part are completely gone and just a few people exist. The Buddhists, who their presence in South Asia is almost completely gone. How do you integrate that? So if Pakistan is supposed to be a land of Muslims, what does it mean to be non-Muslim? And how do you integrate that into this identity? How do you create a more pluralistic identity? How has Pakistan become impoverished by the loss of the non-Muslim other? How's its cuisine, its ideology, its religion, its culture? How has that lost out in the loss of the non-Muslims, the Sikhs, the Hindus, the other groups that were there? And these are just questions that I'm asking, and that's why I wanted to think if we can discuss it further, or you're interested in going deeper into these ideas. The question is also, how do we make Pakistan a more pluralistic society? How do we develop sort of the pluralism of Pakistan as a place where multiple perspectives and ideas and groups of people can live together without it resorting to violence, without resorting to, since 9/11, almost 50,000 people have died in just intercommunal violence within Pakistan, right? Thankfully, that started to decrease, but now with the American withdrawal of Afghanistan and going back into sort of Taliban hands, will that intolerance and violence sort of spill over into Pakistan again? So how do we create a robust civil society within Pakistan to accept pluralism and difference? And if your tradition is based on an Islamic present, how do you reconcile the pre-Islamic past in order to create a more durable identity, rather than just focusing on Islam and trying to disregard everything that goes before, the thousands of years that go before it, of history, of language, of civilization that goes before it, right? And then ultimately, how do we conceive of an Islamic identity within Pakistan where it's not an Islam versus the West, that somehow everything in the West is evil, and everything the West does, we have to do the opposite of, because the opposite is Islamic, right? That you can think in much more complex terms about what Islam means vis-a-vis the West, right? Okay, so those are the kind of it was a very short presentation, but those are kind of some of the ideas that I just wanted to kind of put out there in terms of the work that I'm doing with as a Fulbright scholar in Pakistan. Yeah. So I see that Raza has a question. Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right. I mean, I think that especially the influence of Wahhabism has really had a very deleterious effect on the pluralism of Pakistan, of Islam that exists. But I think at the same time, what you see from the outside is quite different from the lived reality in Pakistan. So a couple, like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, was Maulidi, the Maulid an-Nabi, the birthday of the Prophet. And you just go down the streets of Lahore, and the streets are decorated, and people are, of course, Maulidi is completely forbidden by Wahhabis. They don't believe in it. But you just go down the streets, and kids are wearing their best clothes, and they've created dioramas, and they're celebrating with naats and marsias. People are giving away alu puri, to anybody that's there. The dargahs are all lit up. So I think there still exists, as much as at a political level, there has been a destruction and a desire to create a very legalistic and narrow view of Islam. I think there's enough of the older form of Islam that's pluralistic that can exist, and that, if given the right political circumstances, can also be an important force for inclusion in Pakistan. Yeah, so I mean, are there any other questions or ideas that you would like me to kind of go deeper into? Um, so yeah, I mean, those are kind of the overall ideas behind Jainism and kind of pluralism in Pakistan. Um, is there hope for Pakistan, and what form can it take? I mean, I think that um, some of the ideas of Imran Khan are very good. I think he's trying to tackle climate change by planting 1 billion trees and trying to develop a tourism industry. He has invested money in developing the Sikh shrines over there in Pakistan. He did try to build the first Hindu temple in Islamabad. That didn't go very well, unfortunately. But I think that there is enough. I think there's enough within Pakistani society, like on people, and you see among younger generation, there's like honestly in the big cities, there's a lot of resistance to religion, or people are just not interested in religion as much. Um, so I think that this had a backlash. I think the hardcore sort of pushing religion down people's throats, and you see this in Iran as well, right? You go to urban Tehran, and kind of the impact that forcing people into religion has had on younger generations. I mean, you have like a whole group of people who are kind of secular or actually anti-religious. So I think that the pendulum swings from one way to another, and if there's enough space, new civil society can sort of emerge, I think. I think there's still tension, I think, between Sunnis and Shias, but I think one of the good things is that at least in Punjab, things have stabilized. Punjab and Sindh, things have stabilized. I think you're still having violence in Balochistan between Sunnis and Shias, and particularly against Hazaras and sort of other minority communities. So that tension still exists, unfortunately, and there's still people who would wish to exacerbate those tensions. But the hardcore violence of groups like Sipa Sahaba and stuff like that, I think that has the army, particularly in the state, has very aggressively targeted those groups who were trying to create a larger Sunni Shia conflict within society. The destabilization impact has sort of the idea of its destabilizing civil society has really decreased. So you still have sporadic violence, but it's not as systematic as it was like 20 years ago. I don't know. I mean, I disagree with the idea of Pakistan as a failed state. I mean, I feel like it has a core. The military keeps it. It has the majority of institutions, so it's a stable society. Is it stable according to democratic lines? No, I wouldn't say so. But even though there is democracy and there is some space for freedom of speech and religion, so I think that it's taken on more of a, I think rather than sort of different institutions, it's taken on more of a, it's been mentored, I should say, by China. And so that model of organization, of a party behind the scenes that helps to control and develop stability within a society, I think is a model that has sort of taken hold. I think the political actors come and go, but then you have the central institution that keeps the society sort of functioning. And then you have an oligarchy as well. So the oligarchy, in addition to the military, helps to keep some sort of financial and then sort of and military stability within society. Yeah. Should state and religion be separated? Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely the imposition of religion weakens religion itself as well, because if religion is behind injustice, then religion loses credibility. The separation of it actually strengthens religion, and we see this in the case of the United States versus Western Europe, where religion was tied to the state and eventually lost credibility. In the United States, it was decoupled, and it allowed it to, this sort of marketplace of religions and ideas allowed it actually to have a much more robust presence in political life. When you compare it to India, do you agree that it is the education system has allowed India to move ahead, whereas education in Pakistan has remained behind? Yeah, I definitely think that the education system has had a lot to do with it. And you have development of, you did have a legacy of liberal education within India. You also had the development of technical education, of a world-class technical education, medical education, that allowed it to develop world-class institutions. Whereas Pakistan never necessarily had that wealth. I mean, also, so not only do you have the institutions that at the beginning of partition, that Pakistan had a dearth of. It didn't really inherit the bureaucracy. It didn't really inherit other democratic institutions the way that India had. So you only had the military, which was the strongest institution that existed. But also India then, in the age of globalization, as it sort of, it was able to generate wealth through outsourcing to the tech industry that allowed it then to develop better and stronger educational and medical institutions in a way that Pakistan never had that sort of influx to the development of wealth. So the fact that it never really benefited from globalization in the same way never allowed it to have the access to wealth and expertise to further develop its society. Yeah. So. Any other questions?
Sorry, I was just saying that going back to the education, madrasas and, what is taught in the madrasas and, also what is being preached by the mullahs on the, tell us more about that. I mean, out here, we just read and we hear, but you've been on the ground there. So what is the real situation?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Pakistan has become much more, I feel like it's opening up as a society. I mean, you still have political problems, and that's part of the larger issue, is like who's going to, who's going to rule within Pakistan, and what is the impact, which group is going to have political power. And that's kind of the larger issue, is that you need to have a more stable power sharing agreement across different provinces and with different interest groups. So basically you need to have a situation in which, if democracy is what you want, you need to have a situation where different groups gain and lose power in a free and fair system, a relatively free and fair system, right? So you have that in the United States, where Democrats lose and then they win, and Republicans lose and they win. And that idea of there being fair and free elections and every group having a chance at power is something that is very important. The question also then becomes, I think this is the larger question that Reza sort of comes up with, that he posted. The wild card is going to be China, because I think worldwide democracy is in retreat. And if the next couple of decades are going to be the challenge between America and China, I think the authoritarian model of governance is now seen as legitimate and possible. And so the huge influx of money and the disinterest of the Chinese in terms of liberalism and political institutions means that the authoritarian streak could be strengthened, and sort of the liberal institutions could be weakened. So I think that that's also a possibility. And this is the larger question. Yeah.
So there are a couple more questions there.
Sure.
I'm just looking at the last one. Many past leaders of India have offered a hand of friendship, but Pakistan has swept away. Any comments on that?
I mean, I think that on both ends, I mean, there has been overtures by the Pakistanis, by the Indians for peace. I think, it depends on each of the different instances. I mean, just to give you an example right now, we had a scholar of Jainism that came to Lahore, right? So he was able to very easily get a visa, and we wrote a letter of support for him. I tried to go to the Khoja Studies Conference last year to Bombay, and I wasn't able to get a visa. He comes here to Lahore. We show him around. He gives a lecture, everything. We try to allow him to pass the border at Wagah to go back to India. On the Pakistan side, they had no problems with him leaving. The Indians wouldn't accept him and his OCI card. He had to buy an $800 ticket to go to Muscat, then Doha, then back to India. So on the Pakistan side, at least where I see right now, Indians are welcome to come to Pakistan, or Indian Americans are welcome to come to Pakistan. There's no reciprocity at this point with this government as well, right? And there's a hard, so I think that it can't all be blamed on Pakistanis. I think that the Pakistanis open up and they close. Indians open up and close. What you really need is you need sustained effort on both sides to help to resolve this conflict. Because what ends up happening is that it's just constantly border skirmishes. They fight with each other, tit for tat. You withdraw your ambassador, I withdraw my ambassador, I close the border, you close the border. So just this constant sort of useless fighting with both sides, rather than trying to, on a prolonged long-term scale, develop, citizen to citizen diplomacy, develop humanitarian sort of goals together, right? So there are ways that they can cooperate, improve trade relations, things like that, that could eventually lead to permanent peace. And I think that there's unwillingness on both sides, actually, because both political regimes benefit too much from the conflict. They derive money, power, prestige, votes from the continued conflict. And so on both sides, groups, there are very vested power, entrenched power groups that do want the conflict to continue.
Right, doesn't help. Okay, it's coming on to 3 o'clock. Can you stay on for a few more minutes?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Nasir, give you a chance. Do you want to come back on your the question you asked earlier on the Jainism and the?
I think I will pass, because I think the perspectives is where the gap is. So I respect the way he has responded. Thank you.
Okay, great. Can you, Dr. Akhtar, can you please speak on Kashmir and the issue, and will there ever be peace there?
That's a good question. It's very unfortunate what's happened to the Kashmiris under the current government, in terms of kind of the fact that they have been treated quite badly. Their autonomy has been taken away. So I think that Indian oppression in Kashmir has been quite horrific. So I think that the Indian government can do much more to alleviate sort of the suffering of the Kashmiri people. I think also Pakistan uses that as a way of helping to, fund groups to destabilize the region as well. So they're also using it to their advantage as well. And then using that as a cudgel to say, like, we are protectors of Muslims in South Asia, and it's a Muslim majority area. Ultimately, I think, we have to figure out if we believe in the idea of democracy, we need to figure out some sort of way in which the Kashmiris are given control over their political destiny. And I don't necessarily mean to separate into their own country, but if they stay within India, how do you give them a sense of control and autonomy, right? So when we think about Punjab, the Sikh dominance in Punjab had been decreasing for many, many years, right? So the number of children they were having was decreasing. Many of the Punjabis left Punjab to go into urban areas. So the Sikhs themselves were no longer a majority within Punjab. So the Indian government decided, okay, well, we need to make sure that, and this also was leading to other types of violence, right? The rise of the Akali Dal movement and things like that. So the Indian government decided, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to partition Punjab, make it into a smaller state where the Sikhs are a majority, then create Haryana and these other states in order to ensure that the Sikhs have a dominance and they have a space and a place for their regional identity and their linguistic and religious sort of identity. So I think that Kashmir can be treated in a similar way, where they're seen as also part of the majority and given space to express legitimate political grievances, but within, sort of a democratic and framework of a liberal sort of India. So I think that, again, it's an issue where if you were to approach it from a humanitarian viewpoint, the situation is not difficult. Everybody wants to be treated with respect. They want to be able to work and to have peace and to bring up their families and to have a good job. These are very basic things that all humans want. So, trying to dominate and to destroy and to oppress, and in nonviolent ways to exert control, from a Jain perspective, would be seen as an illusion. That you're trying to, through illusory means, you're trying to dominate others. And there has to be ways of embracing multiple perspectives and to be able to create peace within Kashmir. So I think the Kashmir issue is not unresolvable. It simply is a lack of perhaps political imagination and will to resolve the issue.
Right. Not sure sort of what support the government, Pakistan, or they have, or what pressure is being put on India. But anyway, I'll stop there. Just final question. Influence of the Chinese influence. How will it affect the Pakistani future?
Oh, this is the $100,000 question. I mean, they're developing infrastructure, which is important. There are no political demands from the Chinese, but they definitely need Pakistan to support their larger political and strategic aims in the region, in the world. I think at the very least, it has contributed to better transportation in Pakistan. Now you have like roads that are built by the Chinese that are exceptional, that go into like the most remote parts of Pakistan. Electricity is not really a problem anymore because of the power plants that have been built. So the infrastructure is improving, but of course the infrastructure is there more to extract resources and to move resources. I don't know. I mean, it's really up to, it remains to be seen to what extent at the political level is it going to have an influence, and also what does a foreign element mean to Pakistan, which for the most part, as diverse as it is, it has a certain type of homogeneity. It's not a pluralistic and multicultural society in the way that the West is. And so what does the influx of Chinese mean for Pakistani identity and culture and society? I think that's a larger question. So those are, I don't know. I can't tell you.
Yes. Time will tell. Tell. Well, I think with that, on that note, we will bring the session to an end. But again, I must say thank you so much for
my pleasure.
Making time for us.
Of course.
I know you're so busy, and I just got another announcement on, when is it, Tuesday? You're talking on Allama Iqbal?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So it's ongoing, plus your research continues,
right,
and your travel continues. We wish you well. And
thank you so much.
Thank you again. Thanks, really enjoyable. And we got a bonus on Jainism today. So thanks.
Absolutely.